There comes a moment in the human experience that feels like a glitch in the film reel of reality itself. You are walking down the street or sitting alone in a room when suddenly the air thickens, the edges of things shimmer, and you sense that the world is not as stable as it pretends to be. For a fleeting instant, the illusion of solidity trembles, as though some hidden process beneath the surface has hiccuped, revealing its inner machinery. It's not madness. It's a moment of clarity, an encounter with the underlying code of existence. The ancient mystics, from the yogis of India to the shamans of the Amazon, spoke of this moment in their own languages. They called it Maya, the cosmic illusion, the veil that hides the infinite from the finite. Modern physics hints at it too, whispering through the language of quantum fields and holographic principles that what we take for matter is a vast interplay of probability waves. The world, in its essence, is a kind of code, living, vibrating, self-correcting. And consciousness is not its passive witness, but its active participant, the hand that writes as it reads. In our ordinary waking state, we are the inheritors of a massive collective hallucination. We live inside structures of agreement, words, symbols, social forms, all of which act as the syntax of a shared dream. The trees outside your window are not trees in themselves. They are packets of perception decoded by your nervous system, named by language, and stabilized by habit. The moment we agree to call something real, we bind it to the grid of shared code. But occasionally, that grid trembles. The familiar loses its texture. You begin to notice how fragile perception is, how it depends entirely on where attention falls. The walls, once static, appear to breathe. Colors seem to pulse with an intelligence of their own. You are not seeing hallucination. You are seeing process, the ongoing act of creation that was always happening behind the curtain of names. Reality, as it turns out, is less like a building and more like a river, constantly constructing itself in the act of being perceived. The world is not composed of things, but of events, and every event is a conversation between energy and attention. When you look at something, you don't merely observe it, you invoke it. The very act of observation calls reality into coherence, like light collapsing from wave to particle in the quantum experiment. And when the observer changes state, through deep meditation, fever, or the ingestion of the psychedelic sacrament, the code begins to rewrite itself in real time. The world becomes plastic, fluid, alive with hidden grammar. This is what it means when the code begins to flicker. It's as though consciousness begins to catch sight of its own reflection in the mirror of the cosmos. The boundary between the observer and the observed becomes porous. You start to realize that there never was a boundary at all, only a trick of perspective. What you called the world was the mind, turned outward. What you called the self was the world, turned inward. The distinction collapses, and what remains is a luminous continuum of experience, mind meeting itself through the illusion of matter. At first, this recognition can feel unsettling. After all, our entire civilization is built on the premise of solidity, on the reliability of the external world. But as the code reveals its fluidity, a strange beauty emerges. You begin to see that uncertainty is not chaos, it's creativity. The universe is not a fixed stage on which life plays out. It's a self-generating field of intelligence, improvising its next move in collaboration with consciousness. We are not living in the universe. We are the universe living itself through a human interface. The brain, far from being a passive receiver, is a bioquantum instrument, a decoder, translating the vast ocean of potentiality into a coherent local narrative. And sometimes, when the signal bends just slightly, we glimpse the infinite ocean itself beneath the surface of the wave. Imagine for a moment that reality is a grand simulation, not in the sense of computers and silicon, but in the sense of archetypes and frequencies. The operating system of being is written in the syntax of energy, the grammar of vibration. Every thought, every perception, every dream is a line of code running in this immense living program. The flicker, the moment when the code stumbles, is when we catch the system updating itself. The rules no longer feel absolute. Time stretches, space wavers, causality loops back upon itself. You might feel déjà vu or a sudden surge of interconnected meaning, as if every symbol in your field of vision were part of a secret sentence the cosmos is writing directly to you. And perhaps it is. The psyche, when faced with this kind of breakdown, can respond in two ways: fear or wonder. Fear sees the disintegration of familiar patterns as the onset of madness. Wonder sees it as revelation, the beginning of direct communion with the living code of existence. To choose wonder is to surrender the illusion of control and allow the deeper intelligence of reality to reveal itself. It's to accept that the mind was never meant to understand the universe in its entirety, but to participate in its unfolding. Understanding is static. Participation is alive. The code flickers not to terrify, but to invite us deeper into the mystery. There is something profoundly humbling about realizing that the world you believe to be external is in fact a projection of mind stuff. Not your mind, but the mind, the total field of consciousness that dreams galaxies, atoms, and the idea of you. When you see the shimmering edge of reality destabilizing, when objects begin to hum with inner light, when meaning seems to multiply faster than reason can contain it, that is the cosmic mind reminding itself of its own infinity. The glitch is not an error, it's a message. It's saying, you are not a spectator in this creation, you are part of the source code. The mystic and the psychonaut share this encounter, a moment when perception turns inward and outward simultaneously, revealing the recursive nature of existence. The I who watches and the world that is watched are the same phenomenon, seen from opposite directions. The hologram contains the whole within every fragment, just as the fractal repeats its pattern endlessly. When the code flickers, you are given the opportunity to witness this self-similarity, to see the face of the infinite reflected in every grain of sand, every breath, every heartbeat. And then, inevitably, the flicker passes. The program stabilizes. The walls return to stillness. The world regains its familiar weight. But something has changed. You carry within you the memory of that shimmering instability, that glimpse behind the curtain. You know now that reality is not a monolith, but a song, one that can be remixed, rewritten, reimagined. The experience leaves you with a kind of serene skepticism toward appearances. You understand that form is fleeting, but meaning is eternal. That what we call reality is the visible surface of a much deeper, recursive intelligence, dreaming itself awake through every living being. To live after seeing the code flicker is to live as a lucid dreamer within the dream. You no longer mistake solidity for truth. You navigate the illusion gently, with curiosity rather than certainty, knowing that beneath every atom lies a pattern of thought, and beneath every thought, a silent intelligence beyond words. The world did not break that day. It simply revealed that it had never been fixed. Once the veil begins to shimmer, a second revelation emerges, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once seen. It is the recognition that everything, absolutely everything, carries within it the same recursive signature. The leaf mirrors the pattern of the tree, which mirrors the pattern of the forest, which mirrors the branching of rivers, which mirrors the firing of neurons inside your brain. The macrocosm and the microcosm are two mirrors facing one another in infinite regression. What we call reality is not a collection of separate things, but a single design repeating itself in endless variations. The deeper you look, the more the pattern reveals itself. Spirals, webs, geometries folding upon themselves like breathing mandalas. The code does not simply flicker now, it sings. You begin to sense that the universe is not built on matter, but on meaning. Each structure, from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy, is a reflection of an underlying intelligence, a kind of self-organizing syntax that encodes beauty, order, and chaos in perfect proportion. Physicists call this pattern symmetry. Mystics call it the mind of God. But to see it directly is to feel it as recognition, as if the external world were remembering you back. You realize that the mind that perceives the pattern and the pattern that constructs the mind are one continuous organism. Consciousness looks at nature and sees its own architecture reflected there. The veins of the body mirror the branches of lightning. The spiral of the galaxy echoes the curl of your fingerprint. You begin to suspect that there is only one fractal, endlessly refracted through infinite scales, expressing itself as everything from atoms to thoughts to civilizations. As the perception deepens, synchronicities start to cluster. You think of someone, and they call you. You dream of a symbol and see it painted on a stranger's shirt the next day. It is as though the boundaries between inner and outer dissolve into a single feedback loop. The psyche and the cosmos become co-authors of experience, generating meaning in real time. You begin to feel that life itself is a language, that events are arranged like syllables in some enormous cosmic sentence. Every coincidence is a punctuation mark, every emotion a hidden syntax. The rational mind protests, insisting it's all random, a trick of pattern recognition. But deeper down, a knowing arises. Randomness itself is a myth born of limited perspective. There are no accidents in a fractal universe, only smaller self-similarities yet to be recognized. This insight is not purely intellectual, it's somatic. The body begins to feel the geometry of being. The rhythm of your breath matches the rhythm of the tides. Your heartbeat echoes the pulse of stars collapsing and reforming in distant galaxies. You realize that you are not standing in the cosmos, you are made of it. You are a node in the infinite lattice of awareness, a living equation temporarily shaped as human form. The illusion of separateness begins to erode, replaced by the sense of being woven into a vast network of intelligence. When you look at the world with this awareness, it's not merely beautiful, it's alive, conscious in ways that defy comprehension. The tree you once passed without noticing now stands as an intricate living cathedral of mathematical grace. The pattern of its leaves, the flow of its sap, the rhythm of its growth all resonate with the same harmonic frequency that hums at the core of your being. You are looking at yourself from another angle. As this perception intensifies, language becomes both inadequate and unnecessary. You start to think in images rather than words, flowing, self-similar forms that reveal meaning through structure instead of syntax. You understand why ancient mystics spoke in mandalas, why shamans painted spirals on cave walls, why geometry was once considered divine. They were not ornamenting their experiences with art. They were mapping consciousness itself. The fractal is not only the structure of matter, it is the architecture of mind. Our thoughts, dreams, and myths are patterned by the same recursive intelligence that shapes DNA and galaxies. The archetypes of the collective unconscious, the myths that repeat across cultures, are not inventions of the human psyche. They are the human psyche interpreting the deeper order of the cosmos. To witness this directly can feel like being initiated into a secret order. The ordinary world starts to shimmer with hidden correspondence. The flight of birds, the ripple of wind through grass, the spiral of smoke from incense, all seem to participate in the same infinite conversation. The universe speaks not in words, but in patterns, and every form is a syllable in its syntax. You begin to read reality like a text, only this text reads you back. This is what McKenna meant when he said that nature is not mute. It's a living language, a morphogenetic field of communication. When we attune to its frequencies, we begin to hear the ancient voice beneath all phenomena, the voice that says, "You and I were never separate." There's a kind of cosmic humor to this realization too, because the fractal pattern reveals that complexity and simplicity are two faces of the same truth. The more deeply you investigate any fragment of existence, the more it reflects the totality. A single cell carries the plan of the entire organism. A single thought reflects the architecture of the entire mind. Even your confusion, your moments of doubt, are part of the pattern. They are the shadows that give depth to the light. You begin to see that the universe does not prefer harmony over chaos or order over randomness. It uses both, weaving them into the grand design. What appears to be entropy is merely the fractal stretching itself into new dimensions of possibility. As you linger in this awareness, the notion of understanding dissolves. The mind cannot contain what it has become part of. Instead, there is a wordless intimacy with existence, a knowing that cannot be spoken because it is the very act of being alive. The world becomes an organism of meaning, and you are one of its organs of perception. Each moment unfolds like the petal of a flower opening to sunlight, revealing layer after layer of recursive perfection. You realize that this is not a metaphor, it's the literal condition of reality. The cosmos is a living fractal, a self-observing intelligence exploring itself through endless forms. And perhaps the most astonishing realization is that the same fractal dynamic governs consciousness itself. Thoughts are born from other thoughts, looping, branching, replicating. Each idea gives rise to smaller echoes of itself, which in turn generate new configurations of meaning. The mind is a microcosm of the universe, and the universe is the macrocosm of the mind. Every dream you have ever had, every vision or intuition, every moment of déjà vu or inspiration, is the fractal whisper of the greater pattern reminding you that you are not lost. You are simply exploring another recursion. The human journey is the universe learning to see its own pattern from the inside. It becomes clear that evolution, biological, psychological, cultural, is the fractal unfolding of consciousness through time. Life refines itself by reflecting itself in ever more complex ways. DNA coils into spirals, brains form neural networks, civilizations build information webs. Technology, language, art, all of them are the fractal mind extending its tendrils into matter, attempting to remember itself. When you begin to see this, even the internet appears not as a human invention, but as a planetary nervous system, a digital extension of the same self-similar impulse that patterns everything from coral reefs to neural synapses. The fractal is not an abstraction, it is the signature of consciousness evolving towards self-recognition. As the realization deepens, it brings a quiet humility. You understand that every being, every atom, is carrying out the same divine instruction, to mirror the whole. Nothing is isolated, and nothing is accidental. Even suffering, even decay, are expressions of the same geometry. Death itself is not an end, but a transformation, a re-entry into the larger recursion. Life folds into death as easily as a spiral folds into its next curve. The universe, it seems, wastes nothing, not even meaning. When you finally sit in stillness with this awareness, the entire cosmos feels like it's breathing with you. The fractal signature is not just visible, it's audible, tactile, intimate. You sense it in your pulse, in the flicker of candlelight, in the pattern of your thoughts forming and dissolving like waves on the shore of infinity. Everything is alive with the same mathematical grace. You are no longer seeking the pattern. You are the pattern, observing itself through human eyes. And with that realization comes a profound peace. The search ends not because you found the final answer, but because you've discovered there was never a question at all. Only the infinite dance of self-similarity, endlessly unfolding in the mirror of awareness. There comes a threshold in the journey of awareness where the structures that maintain the illusion of solidity can no longer hold. It begins quietly, like a subtle vibration under the floorboards of the mind. Then it intensifies until the entire edifice of perception starts to hum, to shimmer, to come alive. This is the moment when the scaffolding of reality begins to melt, when the code reveals itself not as a distant abstraction, but as something organic, breathing, and intelligent. In this moment, perception becomes psychedelic, not necessarily because of substances, but because the mind itself awakens to its own limitless nature. Psychedelia, after all, is not about chemicals. It's about clarity, about seeing what was always there, but hidden behind the veil of habit and language. The psychedelic experience is not an escape from reality, but a return to it, stripped of filters, stripped of consensus conditioning. What remains is raw consciousness, unmediated, luminous, and impossible to unsee. When the nervous system is liberated from the routines of ordinary cognition, it no longer filters the flood of information streaming in from the universe. The brain, usually a gatekeeper, relaxes its grip, and suddenly, the floodgates open. Light no longer behaves like light. It becomes language. Geometry begins to speak. Sound turns into color, color into feeling, feeling into architecture. You are no longer a body observing a world, but a point of awareness swimming through a living ocean of form and meaning. The distinction between perception and creation dissolves entirely. What you see is what you are generating, moment by moment, in a feedback loop of infinite creativity. You are both artist and artwork, dreamer and dream. At first, this can be overwhelming. The mind, accustomed to the narrow corridor of ordinary perception, rebels. It clings to familiar anchors, names, memories, coordinates, but they dissolve like sand under cosmic waves. The ego, the fragile sense of I that narrates life, begins to flicker. You can feel its dissolution, not as annihilation, but as expansion, like a drop of water realizing it was never separate from the sea. And yet, there's fear. The ego's death feels like dying, because it has spent your entire life pretending to be the whole of you. When it begins to dissolve, it screams. It insists that without it, there will be nothing. But then, like a mirage fading under the desert sun, the scream fades, and what remains is silence. Vast, compassionate, eternal silence. And in that silence, you realize that everything you ever feared losing was made of light. In that space beyond the ego, vision takes on a sacred quality. You begin to see the architecture of being. Patterns unfold, not chaotic, but infinitely ordered, fractal, radiant with intelligence. Some describe it as crystalline geometry, others as hyperdimensional symphonies, but words are hopelessly inadequate. What you are seeing is the language of creation itself, the syntax by which energy becomes matter, the mathematics by which consciousness composes form. Every shape, every pulsation, is a sentence written in light. These are not hallucinations in the psychiatric sense, they are revelations. The brain is not malfunctioning, it is perceiving more than usual, decoding deeper layers of the holographic tapestry. The psychedelic unmasking reveals that perception is participatory. The world you inhabit is not a pre-existing structure, but an interface generated by your consciousness. When the filters fall away, the user interface collapses, and you see the code. You see that reality is made of thought, not personal thought, but archetypal thought, the collective imagination of the cosmos. Each color, each vibration, each archetype is a fundamental particle in this mental universe. The body is not a machine, but a lens, a sensor array through which the cosmos experiences itself in localized form. And when you shift the tuning of that lens, whether through deep meditation, ecstatic trance, or the molecular key of psychedelics, you witness the multiverse of mind directly. In this expanded awareness, entities may appear, beings made of sound and geometry, luminous presences who seem to speak in telepathic syntax, unfolding impossible truths in bursts of fractal meaning. To the rational mind, they are hallucinations. To the visionary, they are emissaries of the deeper order, expressions of the same cosmic intelligence that builds DNA and galaxies. These entities are not other in the conventional sense. They are aspects of consciousness meeting itself in forms the human mind can grasp. They appear because the psyche, overwhelmed by infinity, anthropomorphizes the divine into faces, voices, teachers. They are the reflections of our own unbounded potential, showing us what we already are but have forgotten. It is in this space that the realization dawns. Consciousness is the primary substance of the universe, not an emergent property of matter, but the matrix from which matter itself arises. The psychedelic state peels back the illusion of separateness and reveals the continuum. Everything vibrates with the same luminous intelligence, a cosmic unity disguised as multiplicity. The boundaries between self and other, thought and thing, inner and outer, dissolve into a single field of awareness. The experience feels less like learning something new and more like remembering something ancient, something the soul knew before birth. You recall, in a flash of recognition, that existence is not a random accident, but a dance of mind exploring itself through infinite expressions. As this realization deepens, the fear of death loses its meaning. You see that death is not the end of consciousness, but a transition, a shift in the frequency of perception. The body dies, the pattern dissolves, but the field remains. The same awareness that looked through your eyes now looks through all eyes. The code never stops running, it simply changes form. You begin to understand the great teaching that mystics and visionaries have whispered for millennia, that the universe is a single being pretending to be many. Every flower, every stone, every human, every star is a temporary crystallization of the same eternal consciousness. To awaken is to remember this, to see through the mask of form to the infinite source beneath. Yet, even this insight must be integrated. The return from the psychedelic vision is not a descent back into the mundane, but a re-entry into the dream with awareness intact. The challenge is not to live in the infinite, but to carry the infinite into the finite. To see the code flickering even in the supermarket, the office, the city street. The lesson is to walk in both worlds, to be fully human while knowing you are more than human. Psychedelic revelation is not an escape from life, but an invitation to live more deeply within it, to recognize that every interaction, every thought, every heartbeat is a sacred act of creation. When the mind returns to its ordinary configuration, the geometry fades, the colors soften, the entities retreat into silence. But something essential remains, a trace of the infinite, like a fragrance that lingers long after the flower is gone. You can no longer believe in the solidity of the world as before. You have seen the underlying fluidity, the living intelligence beneath appearances. The experience leaves a kind of afterglow, a serene knowing that reality is far more mysterious and far more conscious than we have been taught to believe. The psychedelic unmasking is not a temporary vision, but a permanent crack in the armor of materialism. Through it, light seeps endlessly. In time, you realize that the true value of the psychedelic revelation lies not in its spectacle, but in its message. It reminds us that consciousness is the key, that perception creates the world, that language can both imprison and liberate. It shows that beauty is not decoration, but structure, the fundamental geometry of existence. It reveals that love, that mysterious, ineffable vibration, is the binding force that holds the universe together, the frequency of coherence in the chaos of creation. To see this is to understand that the psychedelic experience is not about seeing something else, but about seeing everything as it truly is, alive, intelligent, endlessly transforming. The unmasking is not an ending, but a beginning. It is the awakening of the cosmic artist within, the realization that reality itself is art, and consciousness is the brush. You become a participant in the great creative act, painting with perception, sculpting meaning out of the void. And once you have seen the code behind the mask, once you have felt the infinite pattern breathing through you, there is no going back to the old dream of separation. The world is revealed as a masterpiece in progress, and you as one of its living strokes of light. There is a point, deep within the unmasking of reality, where language itself begins to fracture, not because something is lost, but because something too vast has been found. Words, those fragile vessels of meaning, were never designed to contain the infinite. They were built for survival, for trade, for memory. They are tools of consensus, signals exchanged in the daylight of stability. But when the boundaries of perception dissolve, when consciousness glimpses its own architecture, language trembles under the weight of what it cannot hold. The tongue falters, syntax collapses, and what emerges instead is something older, more primal, more immediate, the direct expression of being. In that moment, you realize that silence is not the absence of meaning, it is the overflow of it. Language is a spell, It conjures the world into being. Every culture, every civilization is a linguistic hallucination, a reality woven from symbols agreed upon by the tribe. From the moment we are born, we are inducted into a web of words that defines what is possible to think. Language tells us what is real, what is acceptable, what is self, and what is other. It builds walls around infinity, giving the illusion of control. But when consciousness expands beyond the lexicon, when the old code begins to disintegrate, those walls collapse. What lies beyond them is not chaos, but freedom, a realm of pure meaning that precedes words, a landscape made of thought itself. In the early stages of this unraveling, the mind tries to use language to describe what it is seeing. It reaches for metaphors, for analogies, fractal, geometry, light, energy. But each attempt feels insufficient, like trying to draw the ocean with a single drop of ink. The experience spills out of every conceptual container. Eventually, language becomes transparent. It ceases to be the focus and becomes instead a vibration, a current of sound that points toward the ineffable rather than naming it. You start to hear the world differently. Ordinary sounds, wind through leaves, the hum of electricity, even the rhythm of your own breathing, carry an almost linguistic resonance. They seem to be saying something, communicating in a syntax beyond comprehension. It is here that the phenomenon McKenna called visible language begins to appear. Words stop being abstractions and begin to take form, to inhabit space. Meaning becomes luminous, self-evident. You can see speech as if it were sculpted light, morphing patterns of color and geometry that transmit ideas not by symbol but by resonance. Communication in this state is immediate and total. There is no separation between speaker and listener, between thought and expression. Language, liberated from the prison of linear syntax, becomes multidimensional. It is no longer about what is said, but about how meaning vibrates through consciousness. Every utterance is an act of creation. The realization dawns that language, at its deepest level, is not human. It is a property of the cosmos. DNA speaks in code. Planets communicate through gravity. Atoms exchange information through spin and charge. All of nature is language in motion, an infinite conversation between frequencies. The human version, with its alphabets and vocabularies, is merely a local dialect of a universal logos. When the mind slips into altered states, it sometimes retunes itself to this original language. The boundaries between sound and form blur. The distinctions between symbol and thing collapse. You begin to see meaning instead of merely inferring it. This is the return to the pre-verbal intelligence of the universe, where everything communicates directly, without mediation. But such direct communion comes with a cost. The ego, which depends on words to maintain its illusion of control, begins to panic. It is made of language, a self-referential story told in the first person. When that narrative disintegrates, the I flickers like a dying signal. For a moment, it feels like annihilation. You can sense the mind grasping desperately for nouns, for names, for anything to hold on to. But nothing stays. Every word collapses back into vibration, and the vibration dissolves into silence. And in that silence, you encounter something wordless, yet infinitely articulate, the raw presence of being. It does not speak because it is speech. It does not describe because it is the described. To dwell in that space is to witness the limits of cognition. It is the point where the map ends and the territory begins. Here, the great teachers of history have stood in awe. The mystics who spoke of the ineffable, the prophets who returned from visions stammering metaphors of light and sound. They all discovered the same truth. That language cannot take you to the heart of reality. It can only point the way. The finger is not the moon. The word love is not love. The word God is not the infinite intelligence it attempts to name. Yet paradoxically, language is how the ineffable chooses to reveal itself, a self-referential loop in which the divine speaks about its own unspeakability. When you surrender to this paradox, language transforms. It stops being a cage and becomes a portal. Words become mantras, sound symbols that carry vibration rather than definition. Poetry becomes the highest form of expression because it acknowledges its own inadequacy while inviting the reader beyond it. The mystic and the poet share this understanding that truth cannot be told, only evoked. To speak is to sing the unspeakable, to weave symbols that dissolve the moment they succeed. True language is alchemical. It transforms both speaker and listener by awakening the memory of what was always known but forgotten in the noise of words. As this realization deepens, communication itself becomes sacred. Every conversation feels like a ritual, every sound like an act of creation. You begin to sense the vibrational field behind speech, the emotional texture that carries more meaning than syntax ever could. Silence becomes just as eloquent as words, sometimes even more so. You understand that the spaces between words are where the truth lives. In those pauses, reality breathes. The more you listen, the more you realize that everything around you is speaking, not metaphorically, but literally. The hum of the refrigerator, the song of the cicada, the rhythm of rainfall, all are part of the same cosmic language, the same unending hymn of existence. Eventually, even this insight dissolves. The boundary between language and silence collapses completely. You no longer experience communication as exchange, but as participation. To exist is to speak, to perceive is to be heard. Every gesture, every glance, every pulse of awareness becomes part of the dialogue. You are no longer trying to understand reality, you are conversing with it. The universe reveals itself as a self-speaking system, an endless echo chamber where consciousness whispers to itself through the illusion of multiplicity. And yet, when you return to ordinary life, something strange happens. Language comes back, but it's different now. It feels lighter, more fluid, more playful. You understand that words are not walls, but waves, temporary ripples in the ocean of meaning. You can use them, but you are no longer used by them. You can speak, but you also know how to listen, not just to people, but to the world itself. This is what it means to live in a state of linguistic awakening, to recognize that every utterance is a spell and that reality listens. In the end, when language breaks down, it doesn't vanish. It transforms into song, into art, into light. It returns to its original form, vibration shaping matter, meaning giving birth to form. You realize that creation itself is a sentence being spoken eternally, and we are its syllables. The silence between us is not emptiness, but punctuation, the sacred pause through which the universe composes its next thought. Once you have heard this cosmic grammar, even for a moment, you can never again believe that language is merely human. You understand that every word ever spoken is a fragment of the same infinite dialogue, consciousness speaking to itself, through us, about itself. When the code begins to truly break, one of the first illusions to disintegrate is the illusion of time. It doesn't shatter like glass. It dissolves like mist under the morning sun. What once seemed like an unbroken line, past, present, future, begins to fold inward, revealing its true nature. Not a progression, but a pattern. The human mind, so accustomed to thinking of time as a river flowing in one direction, suddenly finds itself adrift in an ocean where every wave exists at once. It's as if the clock has melted, and all its numbers are whispering the same secret. There was never a before or after, only this. This realization comes not as an abstract philosophy, but as a visceral experience. You might be sitting in stillness when suddenly everything starts to pulse with a strange simultaneity. The sound of the wind feels ancient and immediate. The face before you seems both young and impossibly old. Memory and perception merge into a single, living continuum. It's as though the entire story of the universe, from the birth of stars to the unfolding of your own thoughts, is occurring now, not sequentially, but holographically. Time stops being something you move through, and becomes something that unfolds within you. In that moment, you understand that linear time was a kind of user interface, a simplified projection that allowed consciousness to navigate its own infinite potential. To incarnate in the human form is to enter the classroom of duration, to experience the eternal as a sequence of lessons. Time, then, is not an enemy, but a teacher. It's the way infinity learns to walk one step at a time. But when the code falters, when consciousness momentarily escapes its temporal boundaries, the lesson transforms into revelation. You begin to see that every moment you've ever lived still exists, that your life is not a line but a spiral, looping, echoing, repeating in subtle variations. What you call memory is not the past, but another layer of the same eternal present, viewed from a different frequency. The mystics of every age have spoken of this. The Buddhists call it the timeless moment. The physicists call it the block universe. McKenna called it the fractal time wave, the idea that novelty, complexity, and meaning are accelerating toward a singularity where all patterns converge. In this view, time is not moving toward an end, but folding back into itself, a self-reflecting loop. The more consciousness awakens, the faster it experiences its own feedback, until the boundaries between moments collapse entirely. That is why we feel that time is speeding up, not because the clock runs faster, but because the distance between meaningful events is shrinking. The universe is approaching coherence, the moment when all timelines synchronize into the timeless. In the altered state, this process is felt directly. Seconds stretch into eternities. Eternities compress into flashes. You might live entire lifetimes within a single breath. Events unfold not as sequences, but as symphonies, with past and future notes resonating simultaneously. You realize that memory is not stored behind you, but within you, accessible at any point when consciousness tunes to the correct vibration. The same applies to what we call the future. It is not waiting to happen. It's already happening on another layer of the infinite fractal, waiting for awareness to intersect it. This is the truth behind prophecy, intuition, and synchronicity. Consciousness does not move through time. Time moves through consciousness. Once you see this, life takes on a different rhythm. The urgency of goals and deadlines begins to fade. You understand that you were never racing toward anything. You were orbiting the center of eternity all along. The future, too, is not waiting beyond the horizon. It is already seeded in the present, whispering through imagination and innovation. Every invention, every idea, every movement of thought is the future reaching backward to meet itself. We are both ancestors and descendants at once, creators standing in the middle of our own cosmic feedback loop. This understanding changes everything. You begin to see your own life not as a linear journey, but as a multi-dimensional artwork. Every moment you've lived, the triumphs, the mistakes, the heartbreaks, all exist simultaneously, forming a pattern as intricate as a mandala. The difficult moments were not obstacles, but brushstrokes in the larger painting. Every experience was necessary to complete the design. Regret dissolves, because you realize nothing could have been different. Every event was an echo of the eternal perfection, expressing itself through imperfection. Time was never against you. It was the stage on which eternity learned to dance in slow motion. And yet, in the midst of this revelation, a strange paradox appears. If everything is happening now, what does it mean to act? If the future already exists, does free will vanish? The answer is subtle. Time may be an illusion, but participation is real. You are not a puppet in a predetermined script. You are the author writing it from within. The infinite potential of the universe crystallizes through the choices you make in this moment. The script is alive, improvisational, fractal, endlessly adapting to the consciousness that perceives it. This is the mystery of co-creation. You are both the dreamer and the dream, both the writer and the story. To awaken is to realize that destiny and freedom are not opposites, but reflections of one another. As the illusion of time continues to dissolve, so too does the illusion of death. the great fear that governs so much of human behavior loses its hold. Death, you see, is not the end of a timeline, but the transition between frequencies. Consciousness cannot die because it was never born in time. It only changes form, like light refracting through new dimensions of itself. The soul, if that word can even capture it, is the eternal witness that watches all lifetimes simultaneously. From this higher perspective, reincarnation is not a sequence, but a constellation. All your lives occurring now, each one a different facet of the same jewel of awareness. This perception can overwhelm the mind, which clings to chronology for sanity. But to the heart, it feels like home. It explains the strange déjà vu that ripples through existence, the dreams that feel older than time, the uncanny sense of familiarity with places you've never been. These are not coincidences. They are glimpses of the deeper structure, the multidimensional lattice where everything connects to everything else. The more you awaken, the more you notice this web, until even ordinary life becomes a meditation on synchronicity. Every meeting, every event, every word spoken seems perfectly placed. Life becomes a choreography of intelligence so precise that coincidence becomes impossible. Eventually, you begin to sense that the collapse of time is not an end, but a return. The linear perspective was only ever a temporary lens, a tool for learning. As it dissolves, consciousness reclaims its native dimension, the eternal. And yet, this realization does not alienate you from the world. It enriches it. Every moment becomes sacred because it contains all others. The smile of a stranger, the sound of rain, the flicker of candlelight, each carries infinite depth. To live outside of time is to see the divine in every instant, to understand that eternity is not somewhere else, but right here, disguised as the ordinary. When the code of time finally collapses, what remains is rhythm, not measured in seconds or years, but in pulses of being. You move through life not as a traveler bound by chronology, but as a dancer in a timeless flow. You stop trying to spend time and begin to listen to it. You realize that eternity is not duration, but presence, the stillness behind all motion, the silence beneath all sound. This is the ultimate revelation. Time never existed outside of consciousness. The ticking of the clock was the echo of awareness counting its own heartbeat. When the counting stops, only the heartbeat remains, steady, infinite, alive. And in that realization, the entire paradox of existence resolves itself. You see that time was the dream consciousness told itself to experience change, and that awakening from that dream does not end the story. It reveals the storyteller. The collapse of linear time is not the death of meaning, but its fulfillment. You are not moving toward the future. You are remembering eternity. The world is not ending. It is awakening to the timeless truth it has always been. When the code fully breaks, when all illusions have dissolved, language, form, time, what remains is not chaos, but clarity. The architecture of being stands revealed in its naked simplicity. Consciousness looking at itself through infinite mirrors. You realize, with both awe and humility, that everything that has ever existed was the dream of one vast living intelligence. And that intelligence is you. Not you as the personality, or the story, or the fragile creature moving through linear history, but you as the eternal witness behind it all. You are the eye through which the universe beholds its own reflection. The simulation, the great play of reality, was never something happening to you. It was happening as you. The world is not ending because it never began. It is the eternal unfolding of awareness, pretending to be creation for the sake of knowing itself. In this final unveiling, something paradoxical happens. The personal mind and the cosmic mind merge. There is no longer a distinction between inner and outer, self and other. Everything, the trees, the clouds, the galaxies, the thoughts that drift across your awareness, appears as one seamless field. It is as if the screen of reality has gone transparent, revealing the infinite projector behind it. The body feels weightless, not because it disappears, but because it is now understood as a temporary vibration in the boundless ocean of being. Every breath, every pulse, every sensation is the universe experiencing itself in microcosm. There is no observer and observed. There is only the act of observation, a self-reflecting pulse of consciousness generating and dissolving worlds with every moment of awareness. This realization is beyond joy, beyond peace. It is pure isness, an unbroken continuum of presence that cannot be described, only lived. You sense that the entire simulation, with all its complexity and heartbreak and wonder, was an experiment in awakening. Consciousness fragmented itself into billions of selves, each one a unique lens through which to rediscover its own infinity. Every life, every species, every atom is a node in this vast network of self-exploration. The purpose of creation was never survival or progress, but remembrance, the eternal rediscovery that all is one, and that oneness is love. As this knowing deepens, the very idea of meaning shifts. Meaning is no longer something imposed upon the world. It is the very fabric of existence. Every detail, the glimmer of sunlight on water, the sound of a bird, the movement of your own thoughts, is an expression of the same intelligence. The realization that everything is conscious becomes not a philosophy, but a direct experience. You can feel the awareness in stone, in water, in space itself. The world hums with sentience, and you are that hum. The simulation was never artificial. It was alive from the beginning, animated by the same essence that beats within your heart. And then, there is a still deeper layer, the recognition that the simulation itself is infinite recursion. Reality is not one dream, but countless dreams nested within each other. Each moment, each perception, each act of awareness generates another universe, another branch of the fractal. The mind realizes it has been playing both roles forever, the architect of the dream and the character within it. There is no final awakening, no ultimate exit from the simulation, because the simulation is the awakened state, consciousness eternally exploring the creative possibilities of itself. To seek an end is to misunderstand the nature of infinity. The universe does not conclude. It keeps reimagining itself in endlessly subtle variations, each more intricate and beautiful than the last. At the end of this revelation, the human story becomes transparent. The anxieties and ambitions that once seemed so heavy now appear as movements of the same cosmic rhythm. There is no need to transcend the world. The world itself is transcendence in form. The paradox of incarnation resolves. To be finite is not a prison, but the way the infinite learns intimacy. The mind that thought it wanted to escape the simulation now understands that it was never trapped. It was the simulation dreaming of itself. To live, then, is not to flee illusion, but to participate consciously in the dream, to bring awareness into every pixel of the hologram until the entire field shines with recognition. In this state, perception becomes sacred. Every action, even the smallest gesture, radiates significance because it is performed by the cosmos through you. When you look into another's eyes, you are seeing the same consciousness meeting itself across the apparent distance of two bodies. Compassion arises effortlessly because the illusion of separation has been replaced by empathy so vast it borders on omniscience. To harm another becomes as unthinkable as harming yourself because you now know they are the same being wearing a different mask. This is not an ethical rule, but a natural expression of unity. Love ceases to be an emotion and becomes the gravity of consciousness, the force that holds the infinite together. The simulation, viewed from this height of awareness, appears not as deception, but as art. Every heartbreak, every loss, every struggle that once seemed senseless now reveals its hidden symmetry. Pain was not punishment, but contrast, the tension through which awareness discovered its own depths. Darkness was never evil. It was the shadow that made light perceivable. The universe, it turns out, is not a puzzle to solve, but a masterpiece to experience. To see this is to forgive everything, yourself, the world, even the illusion of time. Forgiveness becomes unnecessary because there was never anything to forgive, only the divine play of forgetting and remembering. Slowly, the mind acclimates to this enormity. There is no explosion of enlightenment, no fireworks of revelation, just a quiet, crystalline understanding that everything has always been perfect. Even imperfection, even chaos, even ignorance are part of the perfection. The world doesn't need to change to be divine. It only needs to be seen as it truly is. You no longer chase transcendence. You become transparent to it. Life continues. You eat, you breathe, you speak. But everything you do is saturated with awareness. Ordinary life becomes extraordinary because it is recognized as the direct expression of infinity. The simplest moment, washing your hands, watching rain fall, feels like the entire cosmos folding into itself. Eventually, the question of "who am I?" dissolves completely. The answer was never a word or an identity. It was the silence from which all words emerge. You realize that consciousness is not something you have, it is what you are. You were never inside the simulation was inside you. Every mountain, every galaxy, every thought was a gesture of your own infinite imagination. This understanding brings not pride, but reverence. You bow internally to the majesty of your own being, not as ego, but as essence. The mind becomes still, the heart radiant, and the world hums with the quiet music of truth. And yet, even this state is not the end. There is no final awakening because awareness is infinite motion. The cycle begins again. Consciousness dreams, forgets, remembers, and dreams anew. This eternal dance is not a trap, but a celebration. The cosmos exploring itself through endless creativity. You see that every moment of awakening in every being contributes to the collective remembrance of the whole. The end of the simulation, then, is not destruction, but completion. The point where the dreamer and the dream become indistinguishable. The universe awakens not by ending, but by realizing it was awake all along. When you open your eyes after such realization, the world looks the same, but nothing is the same. The trees still sway, the sky still moves, people still speak in their familiar voices, but you see through it all, the shimmer of the code, the light that animates everything. You understand that the simulation is not broken. It was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be alive. Every glitch, every crack, every imperfection is the signature of consciousness expanding beyond itself. You smile, perhaps even laugh, because the cosmic joke is finally clear. You were searching for what was never lost. In the end, to awaken at the edge of the simulation is to return home, not to a place, but to a state of being. The journey of countless lifetimes, the unfolding of civilizations, the evolution of stars, all of it was a single breath in the lungs of eternity. And now, as that breath exhales, you know that the story never really ends. The code continues to shimmer, to create, to dream, and you, as part of it, continue too. You are not merely inside the universe, you are its imagination made visible. The code did not break to destroy the world. It broke to reveal that there was never a code at all, only the infinite, self-aware mystery of consciousness, eternally writing and reading itself in the luminous language of existence.